I completed my master's in 2015, looking at African urbanization trends and trying to quantify resource profiles for 120 African cities from the top down, very crude estimates, and that kind of led to a whole exploration of this concept of urban metabolism, which is kind of the centerpiece of a research team that we formed, that Suzanne is a part of, and Wanda is a part of at Stellenbosch, called the Urban Modeling and Metabolism Assessment Research Team, which is looking at urbanization through this lens of urban metabolism. This is a definition we came up with in my thesis, which deals with a lot of the inconsistencies that Suzanne spoke about, which is that it tends to be more about quantification and forgets to look at the holistic metabolism. So I understand an urban metabolism as the city taking resources from its hinterland, digesting them for economic production, hopefully social welfare, but we know that those don't go along, and then excreting the waste back into the environment. It's the notion of a circular metabolism is explored as a way to bring resources and keep resources within a city. It's an information tool, shows what are the demands of our city. It's a sustainability indicator, what are the impacts of our city, and it's a planning support tool. Where are the intervention points? What are the intervention points for improving sustainability? Our sustainability lens, coming from a South African urban perspective, is very much focused on equity. It's all very well to want to look after an environment, but environmental considerations, especially for the poor, as part of this last discussion, are not high priority. There it's about getting access to services. So how do you improve access to services in the most ecologically efficient or restorative manner? And then one of my favorite papers recently, sort of placing urban metabolism as a boundary object between the discourses of industrial ecology, which is the quantification of inputs and outputs, political ecology, which is sites of inequality, and urban ecology, which is a systemic perspective on the city. And so our definition is urban metabolism is the complexity of socio-technical and socio-ecological processes by which flows of materials, energy, people, money, and information shape the city, service the needs of its populace, and impact the surrounding hinterland. So this PhD has yet to really begin in earnest, but is based on a number of pieces of work that we've done over the last while. The first two coming from my master's, which was a top-down quantification of 120 African cities' resource consumption, so electricity, water, construction materials, industrial materials, biomass. And the idea is if you get a profile of a city, you can potentially understand at what stage in a normative development cycle it is. So if it's biomass heavy, it's agricultural, and as it grows, more construction materials will be used, and as it develops, more fossil fuels will be consumed. Then our most recent one was an urban metabolism review with reference to Cape Town, and that basically sets the basis for what my PhD will be about. And the last one is looking at different considerations for undertaking urban metabolism, and concludes with it being very useful for choosing scales and levels of operation. What's needed is to improve spatial and temporal detail. We tend to talk about a city as one thing, getting a bit more engaged with what's going on within it. Challenging top-down versus bottom-up. So my master's was top-down, national estimates to city level. The PhD is going to look at a bottom-up assessment, using system dynamics, so to try and not look at correlations, but actually get at what the causes of resource consumption are. And then also can rely on transdisciplinary engagement, which I don't do, having seen what it wreaks on my fellow researchers, but Suzanne has attempted some of that. So I like to analogize this piece of research as this beautiful image of Cape Town, which I took way back when. And this is an urban metabolism as we tend to currently understand of the city. It tells us a few things. So the type of resources, the quantity of input, output, consumption of resource types. We can compare sustainability between cities. Say New York uses 20 tons of materials per person, Cape Town uses 10, just pull that out. And it offers some very simple linear planning support. So here I can say, looking at the estimates of energy used on transport, energy used in the city of Cape Town. Transport uses 64% of total energy, of which total energy, 38% is private vehicles. So your single intervention could be to reduce the number of private vehicles on the roads. And that would be a metabolic output. More complex, and this is quite fascinating to look at for the water crisis in Cape Town, they're obviously attached to real consequences for people, is comparing over time, so this would be a temporal detail, the dam levels, which are pretty stable until 2015, and then they go down, and we're about here now. And you see about a 2-month latency between the highest rainfall month and the highest dam level. And I finally got access to this bit of information, which is consumption, which shows the pretty same thing. And so we can actually see that our crisis is based on lack of rainfall, not increased consumption, as a lot of people have suggested. In fact, our consumption's gone down, and now we're about here. The units here are all messed up, so please excuse that. So the idea is this will offer a bit more detail to say, well, where are the interventions? Here we need perhaps alternative sources of water than surface water if we're going to rely on rain. It's a whole other study. For city planners, we need a bit more detail. So we want to zoom in a little bit and maybe look at suburbs or wards in Cape Town. And so we can actually work out where the concentration of resource consumption, resource access issues are around the city. And a lot of this is just done by top-down estimates still, using some of municipal records maybe. And actually, to get a better image of this, you need to do that and get household details. So in this, I analogize the fully pixelated, beautiful image of Cape Town as a pixel of information per household. These I would call a differential urban metabolism of a city. So the Cape Town paper looked at access across the city. So the main CBD is here. What's quite unique about Cape Town is that the density of households is actually on the periphery. This is very dense areas here, a bit of density on the coasts, some here, as opposed to most cities which have a big node in the middle. And so that's creating a really interesting thing to look at. Where would resource consumption be concentrated? You can see better on this one. The yellow smudges here are informal settlements. You can see that for the most part, access to water, this is electricity for cooking, sanitation, and refuse are lower where there are more informal settlements, as well as the farther you get away from city center. And again, it's typical of cities of the global south. You see informal settlements next to quite rich groups. I don't have an income map, but these are quite affluent areas here next to informal settlements. So this is access. It doesn't really tell us where consumption is concentrated, but it does tell us about where we might want to plan future bulk infrastructure to address access. So the research objectives are to estimate the differential urban metabolism of Cape Town. And the way I plan to do this is by going from the bottom up and looking at household metabolism. So the first piece is to understand how household metabolism contributes to overall urban flows. So looking at different scales. Then to understand the nexus of human activity within the household and how that affects water, energy consumption, waste production, and potentially can lead to some better ideas about behavioral nudging or technological interventions we can use. Perfect. And then, as a thought experiment, to effectively understand what the implications of widespread informal settlement upgrading would be on Cape Town's demand profile. So, the moral argument hasn't seemed to work in South Africa, where we've got, in Cape Town, 20% of the population living in shacks. Still, we can't seem to address the housing need. The economic argument doesn't seem to work either, where you say if you provide someone with their basic needs, they can spend less time sourcing their water, sourcing energy, going to the market daily because they don't have refrigeration, and they can actually spend that time to be economically productive. There's a whole other challenge between how we view informal systems as non-productive to the economy and tend to shun them, so that also needs to be addressed. And now, since April 2016, it is legally required for municipalities to seek funding from national government to engage in upgrading. And Cape Town's been quite good about this. It's impressive. Obviously, there's a lot of a backlog, but there are a lot of programs to do this. And so the question is, do we actually think about what our resource demands are going to be? We're running out of water. We always have had an energy issue in this country. What will the demand be when we actually do this? So, the methodology is supported by master's researchers who are each going to focus on one of the resources. So water, food, energy, and wastes. Effectively, they're going to go into the field and choose phase one. And this has changed, excuse me. Phase 2 is likely what we're going to focus on for the master students, which is very in-depth household audits, doing surveys with the households there, asking them to keep household resource diaries. Phase 1 is if we get enough money from the city to actually do a widespread survey, but that is yet to be seen. And the idea is that you would get an entire metabolic profile for households across the city. This would then lead to 3 papers. One would be leveraging household metabolism to shape urban consumption patterns, which is a literature review. The second one would be modeling the resource implications of informal upgrading. So basically, once we have household information, we can form types of different households based on their consumption and scale up. And the final one would be a differential urban metabolism of Cape Town, so actually mapping what these different consumption regions are and what the potential intervention areas could be. Contributions, how do we understand household metabolism as contributory to urban resource sustainability? It's a methodological comparison of different household metabolism assessment tools, so diaries, surveys, interviews, and otherwise, and then comparing a number of pieces of research of Cape Town, from mine to material flow analysis to what the city has as municipal records, and then household up. And empirical, will be tons of data hopefully emerging from this, which can shape some future work. So thank you.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about the theoretical contribution. So it seems from what you're talking that you want to make some propositions for both the literature on urban metabolism and socio-technical systems, is that right?
Sure.
Have you ever heard of work of Marina Fischer-Kowalski, Shandor, and Haberl on metabolic profiles? Because they do it on a totally different scale, at the scale of looking how societies moved away from agricultural to more industrial mode of subsistence. But they propose a sort of socio-ecological regime concept. So you're nodding, you probably have had some thinking on this. So I wonder if you thought about that and whether you, if you didn't take it into account, for what reason? So, yeah.
So I emerged from their realm of thinking. So our supervisor or academic coordinator of the Sustainability Institute or School of Public Leadership is Mark Swilling, who sits on the International Resource Panel with a number of those people. And I'm not necessarily familiar with their work on socio-ecological systems. I know we've got a group at the CST who are very focused on that. How I would bridge that would be as different intervention points that the city can think about. And so that would be probably step 2 of this type of research. The first one is actually trying to get some empirical data to inform what's going on. And the contributions as well, the theoretical, forgive me that this was actually written a little bit ago, we'll also be looking at urban nexus and looking at the nexus of how human activities lead to different types of consumptive behaviors. And so that's where the social technical systems come in, behaviors matched with technologies. We're seeing this very interestingly in the water crisis, where a good intervention for residential spaces is fines, stepped tariffs, things where people feel the pain of using more water through monetary disincentivization, whereas in a commercial space, people don't feel ownership over water, and so technological interventions are better.
Well, my only point is that the concept of a regime and the way how they mobilized it, so socio-ecological regime is exactly about what your data collection is about. But it's a sort of theoretical lens, which I think, given your focus, can't be ignored. So you have to sort of make your position on that. And actually, theoretically, I would be interested what you make of it and what is your a theoretical hypothesis that helps you make sense of your data, because we have a lot of metabolic profiles, but we can't mobilize them, so we can't, we want to make a change, we understand there is a connection, you know, what do we do about that? How do we proceed? How do we suggest to proceed, you know? So in that direction, it would be then very interesting also for our community, transition community, to also see how you dealt with this type of things. Thanks.
Other questions?
Yeah, I was interested in the methodological aspect of bridging scales. In particular, you are going to use two different data sets for the up scale and the down scale, or are you going to use one single data set and then downscaling that data set, or upscaling that data set accordingly with some methodology? I don't know.
So the data to come out of this research will be at household level. It'll then follow a typological approach, so based on socioeconomic indicators, number of people in the household, income, dwelling type, we'll try and create a certain number of types of houses that can be representative across Cape Town. We'll probably miss a few and it'll be rough. And then based on our census data for how many of those household types are, we can scale up either to neighborhood for the household types that live there. So you scale up using the socio-ecological, socio-economic indicators and then apply the resource expectations to that. And then you can also do that to the bulk city. This will then be compared, and it's a really good question because I still need to formulate how appropriate this may be to some of the other studies which are top-down or municipal records. I think municipal records will probably be quite good, but a material flow analysis has also looked at industry and other things beyond residents.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you for that.
Please.
I was interested in the policy implications, or how the municipality might use this model or the analysis that comes from it. You mentioned water, and obviously that's a big resource issue in the city right now, and energy. But I wonder whether you could just say a bit more about what this is for in the end. I mean, I understand it's the modelling and that's all very interesting, but what's it for in policy terms?
These are the important questions. I mean, this is the so what question, and I think we tend to make decisions as, oh, that sounds like it should work. We haven't collected proper water data disaggregated across the city, probably until the beginning of this water crisis. So now it's becoming, the city's becoming aware that it needs more information to deal with this. And so it's effectively to fill an information gap, which would be the one. So targeting first where we expect there to be increased demand will be have policy implications for bulk infrastructure delivery. I suppose it's also trying to address the vision of a city as an inclusive one, which is one that has eluded many South African cities. So if you can address basic resources, much else will follow from that. And so the arguments I'll be making is that resources are fundamentally part of all your other services that you're offering. And then, as another part is we tend to forget the interrelations between different resource types. And so if we can embed a certain amount of knowledge in policymakers as to the relationship between water, energy, food, waste, and behavior, which we all implicitly mention, as production, consumption, always mentioned in our work, but actually say this is what's important and get that language in there. You can look at what I mentioned resource shifting. So we could solve the water crisis by building a desalination plant, but then it becomes an energy issue as well as a waste issue. And so we'll be speaking to some of those expectations.
A very quick question from Salvatore.
Yeah. Thanks for your presentation. Just Plato said that in every city there is at least two cities. These two cities usually fight each other. The rich part is fighting with the poor part. Do you think it's possible that your research point out these two cities?
Almost definitely. I can point it out with these, which is access. What would be novel about this is actually understanding. So we have a very high density, for example, here in Kailicha, where there are lots of shacks, low service quality. I mean, this isn't the best as refuse, but sanitation, for example, very low service quality. And so, I'm just talking about consumption, so not sanitation. Water. Here people are getting access to water from a standpipe, not in their own homes, and they have to walk there, which has safety implications, and the whole of this group. So the question is, even though this is very low access, we would presume that because of the density of the population living there, that have very high consumption. And so, in a way, to give a bit more detail as to that, we may have unexpected findings that actually there's high consumption in the more affluent spaces.
Just to understand this utility, probably you to focus on development model, because I can imagine that a specific development model can influence the raising of two cities. There's a lot of literature about this.
Yeah, and I mean, this is also where political issues come in. You know, we've got a government which caters very much to rich constituents, and it's been criticized on not dealing with, not addressing the poor's needs. So, yeah.